Have you ever thought about how hard it would be to read if there were no spaces between words, or if the words didn't always run left to right? If you can read fluently, then that means you most likely received many years of schooling to get to this point. What made it possible to teach you how to read quickly, efficiently, and quietly while absorbing and understanding the words effortlessly? Part of the reason has to do with the evolution in the structure of writing over thousands of years. Reading was not always so easy. If we didn't have punctuation, the world and education as we know it would be very different. Many of us would still be illiterate, just from the sheer difficulty of sharing, disseminating, and consuming text without punctuation. Reading at the most basic level for a beginner consists of sounding letters out aloud. At the intermediate reading level, readers begin to recognize the sign without sounding it out. They become better at decoding. Eventually, after much practice, a fluent reader can recognize the whole word by forming a direct pathway in their mind between sign and understanding, bypassing sound. By moving to silent reading, humans switched how we process words. Advanced readers do not attach a sound to a letter, but think about the word in a higher way. The immediate recognition of a word without sounding it out is called word identification. Proficient word identification has been associated with better comprehension and faster reading speed. Spaces between words made word identification possible, and punctuation increased fluency by adding structure to writing. Humans have been reading and writing in some form since 2000 BC, but literacy wasn't present widely until 600 BC, when the custom of displaying public laws on the walls became common in ancient Greece. The Greek style of writing was very different from what we use today. Writing from as early as Homer's time, around 800 BC, was written without spaces, called scriptio continua, and all in uppercase. Actually, nearly all ancient scripts were written without separation between words. If that wasn't hard enough to read, manuscripts were also written in the boustrophedon, or ox cart style. This means that writing went from left to right on one line, then from right to left on the line below it. Here is a sample of writing from Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that I have rewritten in the way the Greeks would have. Try to read it. Remember, the lines go left to right, then turn around and go right to left. You don't have to read the whole thing to get the idea. If you have trouble reading the piece of script, try again, but this time read it out aloud. Here's the original script, written the way you are used to, next to the boustrophedon style. As you can see, reading the script is very hard unless you try to read it aloud. Very soon after word spacing became a common practice, silent reading began. Here is an example of our contemporaries trying to read the Greek boustrophedon style of writing.
The most massively useful thing, stellar, hiker, hit.
So right now, silent reading.
Huh?
Okay.
A towel says is about them most massive useful thing. Oh, most useful thing. Practical. Sorry, am I going left to right and then right to left?
Yeah. Okay, so remember, right to left, then
And
left to right.
line. Okay, a towel, it says, is about the most massively useful thing, and interstellar hitchhiker can have partly, it has great...
How did you find that? Easier silent reading or easier reading out aloud?
Easier reading it out loud.
Okay, why?
Because I can hear my mistakes, and I can hear if it sounds right or not.
Okay, thanks. Think about how much easier it is to read the text if we just read it in one direction. Around 6th century BC, scribes began to write left to right on every line, and this method eventually replaced all others. Another important aspect in reading that we take for granted is the organization of paragraphs. In his book Orality and Literacy, Walter J. Ong notes that illiterate oral cultures are almost incapable of categorizational thinking, meaning that they can't classify concepts or think in an organized way. He argued that the introduction of writing changed the way we think and restructured our consciousness to be able to understand abstract ideas. The beginning of this structured thinking can be seen in the writings of early Greek and Latin scribes, who began to separate topics in their writing with a short horizontal stroke, which can be seen in Aristotle's writing. At first, the marks were used to note a new stanza in poetry, or the change of a speaker or topic. Later, it separated ideas into sections. The marks evolved from a slash to a large K, called a caput, and eventually to the pilcrow. The pilcrow is recognizable for us as a reversed P, and served as a visual sign to draw the eye to the change of subject in a crowded manuscript. It marked the ends of chapters, and then later marked the beginning of each paragraph, which started with a new line. The ultimate result was a page that was easier to read and topics that were separated. The first formal punctuation began in the 3rd century BC, when Aristophanes of Byzantium, an Alexandrian librarian and playwright, created a system of marks to allow for his readers to breathe while reading aloud and performing plays. The marks were organized into a high, medium, or low dot and were called the comma, colon, and periodos. They signaled the length of the pause. The higher the dot, the longer the pause. The comma eventually evolved from the high dot and was introduced into Greek and Latin texts around 650 AD. Alcuin of York introduced this full stop around 800 to indicate the end of a long passage. It was originally like this, but now we know it as the period. The main advantage of punctuation is that it helps provide structure to writing. This increases comprehension, speed, and fluency when reading. Punctuation also helps clear up understanding, and if it is used improperly, the meaning of a sentence can be changed. Here's a famous example turned joke from Lynn Truss's book, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. Lenora walked on her head, a little higher than usual. Lenora walked on, her head a little higher than usual. The convict said, "The judge is mad." The convict said, "The judge is mad." In the 4th century, Constantine adopted Christianity into the Roman Empire. He funded churches, gave them land, and tax-free status. In fact, religion was one of the main drivers of literacy in history. Most readers of literature were priests trained as scribes. In the Western world, Christianity recognized writing as an effective way to preserve and convey sacred knowledge. Christian scribes' preferred medium for writing was vellum, a parchment made from the skin of calves. One immediate advantage of vellum over wax tablets and papyrus was that a person could write on both sides of the piece, and individual sheets could be collated and bound, creating the codex book we know today. The wealth of the churches and monasteries meant that they had access to large amounts of animal skin. This way, they could easily make parchments from the herds on their own land. All this meant that the scribes did not have to cram as many words as possible onto one page, allowing more room for a conceptually important white space. The elite and growing use of reading and writing by priests demanded that writing become more efficient. Although it took a long time, writing eventually began to change by including more punctuation. In the 8th century, English and Irish priests began to separate the words with spaces to help their students read. Word spacing became a general practice in Western society by the 9th century. After regular word separation became common, so did silent reading. Today we take silent reading for granted. Imagine people trying to read in a classroom or library, and you can see how important silent reading is to education, and even to thinking and concentration. Note the difference between these two situations.
Excuse me. Can you please be quiet?
Suddenly became deaf to wildlife are based on talking about erroneous beliefs.
Hopefully, after watching this documentary, you have gained some understanding of how important word spacing and punctuation are in making reading easier. Without these historical changes in the way we read and write, mass literacy would not have been possible.